Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. I think it's time perhaps to summarize and put together something that's been in the media a great deal lately, and that's pedophilia and child abuse. And let's put some facts down. Let's think about it and try to get a handle on just what the problem is. First off, the causes are largely unknown. Now, some of the people who abuse children are expecting the child to give them the love that they didn't get from their own parents. But they carry out their punishment. Sometimes a child abusing parent is a very well-disciplined person, very conscientious, may even be considered pious, but the child is being punished for not giving that parent the love that parent didn't get from his own, as he perceived it, or she, from their parents. And I say as they perceive it because oftentimes it's not really what a parent does, but it's what the child perceives that the parent does, in terms of love, in terms of rejection. But here's some facts to go with it. Most biological parents in intact families don't abuse children. Let's put the cards on the table. Most of them certainly do not. But what we have is a parenting situation that's pretty sad. Single parents are much more likely to abuse children than parents where there is an intact family. Actually, the mother is actually the most common abuser. And it used to be when those hardback hairbrushes were made, that was the most common weapon of child abuse. In other words, children who were hurt, more often than not, was hurt by a mother who was disciplining a child with that hardback hairbrush. And some of you are old enough to remember those things. They were like little clubs, but they were hit on the hand or something like that. The home is the most likely place for child abuse to take place, and the single parent mother is 30 times, can you imagine, 30 times more likely to abuse a child than the mother in the intact home where there are two parents in the home. If there aren't two parents in the home, and it's a single parent mother, the most common sexual abuser is the mother's boyfriend or the stepfather. They're much more likely to be abusers, whether it's sexual or just physical abuse, but they're much more likely to be the abusers. And it's sad. I know I've reported on that sort of thing before, but there's another study out that just puts all this in focus, the Heritage Foundation. The murders of children, and we've heard about a few of them lately. 55% of the murders of children are done by mothers. That's according to the Justice Department reports in 1994. The father in the home is often taken out of the home, and that creates a problem. Now, a lot of county judges, family court judges, and child protective workers think they're doing a good turn, and it's not their intention to set up even more likely abuse, but that seems to be what happens. The history of it, according to the latest reports, is when the father is taken out of the home for suspected child abuse, the abuse may continue. And the father is more of a protection for stability and the normal pattern of a home than the home becomes in his absence, because when he's gone, what happens? Well, typically the family breaks up, single parent family situation again, and boyfriend, stepfather sets in. So without ever intending to do it, county court and family court judges often are playing into the hands of the child abuse. And so are the child protective service workers, not by intention. Their intention is exactly the opposite. They're trying to do the best they can to try to protect the children. Well, we don't need more lawyers in these situations. What we need is more intact homes. Now, what I've said, all that was well known 25 years ago. We've been rediscovering this information. We're rediscovering what we knew all the time, that intact families are certainly best for children. Let's talk about this pedophilia that's been a lot in the news lately. Most of the pedophilia, that is love of children, which is certainly not the love of child, that has a pretty common cause. People who are pedophiles, that is, those people who prey on children. Number one, most of them aren't really children. They are not below age of puberty. They are typically prepubescent, early teenagers, or right at puberty, and has a fancy word, but basically they're not really children in the legal sense. And the underlying factor there, which the media hasn't been talking about at all, interestingly enough, is homosexuality. And that is a problem in itself. But pedophilia might be homosexual or heterosexual. And the instances of pedophilia in intact homes is quite small, quite rare. Most of the media have been talking about pedophilia and priesthood, that sort of thing. Well, it hasn't been limited. It's been well known, in fact, documentation, well known for years, that a few people in the ministry, all churches involved, few people in the ministry would take advantage of the quiet, comforting atmosphere of the church, where children could feel particularly comforted and secure. A few people would take advantage of that, and that was sad. Now, we didn't really get into this sort of thing until Alfred Kinsey, in 1947, published reports. That's a long time ago, isn't it? He published reports about child abuse. Most people never thought about child abuse until his report came out. And I'm saying most people, I'm talking about the professionals. It was a rare topic. I was studying professional life at that time, and I recall the publication. But what Kinsey did was not good. What he did was he took a lot of information, can you imagine, from pedophiles, people who were incarcerated, who were in prison for pedophilia. And he asked them about the responses of children and the actions of children. His methods in that area, working with children, has been discounted. The scientific community says he did not use appropriate methodology, but there's still a lot of people who go around quoting Kinsey as if he was the know-all and the end-all of this type of thing. Now, there is a group called North American Alliance for Boy-Man Lovers, originated in Boston, which its whole purpose is to set up boys for the benefit, and they call it the mutual benefit, the mutual pleasure, with consenting sex. But this group, fortunately, doesn't represent very many people, but even one is too many. And they usually prey on boys that are 9, 10, 11, 12 years of age. And it's sick. There are even some professional people who've made some studies lately and published it and got a lot of publicity about it, who claim that that's not bad for the boys. I'm talking about these boys who are victims. And it's gotten a lot of media attention in certain places. It's not generally known that a publication of this type of thing would come out and say that pedophilia isn't necessarily bad for children because of the love that supposedly they get it. Well, I don't call it love. I can't really go down that road. In my book, anything that's immoral, illicit, or unhealthy can't be love. But these are strange circumstances. We're getting a lot of media attention, and it's not an accident how it's being reported. A lot of universities and colleges are getting into this type of thing. The faculty, some of them are trying to show how broad-minded they are, how liberal they are, and to go into these things. But it's a strange setting. It's strange, and it used to be that child abuse was just physical, and it's gotten now so that some parents, and I have seen them in practice over the last few years, have even gotten to be afraid to discipline their children, for fear that if they physically discipline their children, they may leave a mark. And if the child goes to school and the teacher sees a mark on it, well, the teachers are mandatory reporters. In other words, any evidence or anything that may appear to be child abuse has to be reported. And that's been on the books for quite a while now, probably 10 or 12 years. They're going the other way. Parents are so afraid of disciplining their children that the children are being allowed to get by with all sorts of things. The definition of abuse has changed, so that, in my opinion, it is much too broad. Somebody's verbal abuse in the presence of a child can be construed as child abuse. In other words, the parents are arguing, and it depends on how they argue and what they do, that can be construed as child abuse. Well, I think some of the things that ought to be reported as child abuse aren't. For example, I think it's abuse of children when the parents split up, bring boyfriends or girlfriends or own into the home, where the children don't know what the family is, they don't know what a setting of the family is. I think that's a type of abuse, but you will never see that being reported as abuse. In fact, that's too often the case. The publicity also lately gets into the abuse of people recalling things that may have happened several years ago. The recovered memory syndrome, and that's gone to quite an extreme. Well, the very latest Harvard Medical School mental health report, I get a regular publication on that, supposedly is a compilation of the latest research in mental health areas. Well, the very latest one having to do with this recovered memory says that the therapists, the counselors, the social workers, the psychiatrists, people who deal with this sort of thing, or who are most likely to hear about these recovered memories, should not take them literally unless there is something to substantiate the information. Now, for a while, there were books coming out, all sorts of reports coming out, that any time a child had a recall or claimed to recall or a fantasy about an abusive situation, then the therapists, the counselors, the social workers were supposed to take it literally, and all sorts of things could happen on that. It's a strange sort of thing. So the recovered memory has been, now there have been some special programs on television about that, about some communities where these things get out of hand. They have gotten out of hand, and all sorts of people have been taken to court. Some have been imprisoned on the basis of false memories. And it's very sad, because this is a circumstance where people are presumed guilty until proven innocent, just the reverse of a usual justice system. Well, enough for child abuse. I had hoped to give a summary of that, and until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Start with a question today that seems to be on several people's mind. I've been asked this sort of thing at different public gatherings. Says, do you think that we in the United States will ever return to the traditional family? And my answer immediately, and after thinking about it several different times, is no. Not without a major revolution, because in effect a revolution is what it took, a very slow revolution, to get away from the traditional family as we have been doing it. Because what we're seeing here, if we were taking a bird's eye view or an anthill, like we were looking down on society and looking to see what things were happening, what we're seeing here, and have seen now over the past years, and it started right during World War II in a major way, was that the women have been moving out of their homes into industry, leaving the homes, and that has changed and influenced all sorts of things. The women's lib movement took off. That really represented relatively few people who were very vocal, and some of them were excessively pushy. But we've had 2 generations of pushing women out of the home, so to speak, and some of them didn't want to go, but they were put in a position that the market price of food and things went up as the number of workers in the family went up. In other words, the market will charge whatever public will stand, and we all know that. So groceries and gasoline and everything else went up when there was more money. We've had a decrease in birth rate, a very sharp decrease in birth rate. We've had an increase in abortion, 42 million of them so far and counting. We've had an increase of old people, comparatively speaking. In other words, people were getting old. So the proportion of old people in the population has increased because there were not babies being born at the same rate. And so with the lower birth rate, fewer people being born, then a percentage of old people comes up. And that's going to be a very serious problem, and it's part of the big change that's going on, because it won't be long until we'll have very few people to support the disabled, dependent, non-working people in society, called the dependency ratio. We've had an increase in single parenting, all sorts of things. And there was a prediction made in 1968 about some of these. Very few people ever read it. It's called Humani Vitae. But Paul VI made predictions of what exactly would happen, and this was related to contraception. He predicted that these things would happen. I've found it very interesting, and when I came to Plattsburgh State and was on faculty there in '68, students were eager to talk about this new ruling on contraception that the Catholic Church had put out. They were eager to talk about it, they wanted to talk about it, but I found that very few of them wanted to read it. They'd rather talk about it without the facts. And early on I took a position that, great, we'll discuss anything, but you must read it first. Whatever you want to discuss, you must do some research, find out what you're doing. They wanted to talk without substance, which isn't anything that's particularly uncommon for any of us college students. I certainly had my share of doing that sort of thing, or trying to. Here's another one. It says, I read in the paper that facilities where sick Catholic priests were sent were not good, and some men came out worse. Is there a reason for that? Well, with all the media of late and that sort of thing coming about, yes, there is a very good reason for that. Sometimes the well-meaning bishops, and I know of some personally, who have sent some men to the very best, they thought the very best facilities, very expensive, very prestigious places. What they find out later is that in some of these places they don't consider certain kinds of behavior as a disorder. For example, certain kinds of sex offenses. Most therapists, psychoanalysts, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, counselors have been trained in the humanistic philosophy that certain things are okay. And so what happened, some of the people were sent to these very good, supposedly good psychiatric facilities. But what they did there was to reinforce what the behavior was that the people were being sent there to treat, because they didn't consider it an illness or a disorder. Now, the American Psychiatric Association, the American Psychological Association have both taken that position. For example, that homosexuality is not a disorder, and so it wouldn't make a difference what religion somebody was, but if a person was sent to one of these places to try to get assistance in working with that problem, they likely wouldn't work with them for that problem. I know of cases, and I've been co-therapist with some of these places, and I know of that sort of situation. So it really boiled down to what is homosexuality and whether or not that's a real problem. It's also been kicked around quite a bit. For example, if someone were to come to me now and say, I have homosexual behavior that I'm wanting to change, will you help me change it? There are some people in these professional groups, American Psychological Association and American Psychiatric Association, who would say, you can't help that person change, because what that person is talking about is not an illness, it's not a disorder, so you're unethical and you're unprofessional if you try to help the person change. Well, I don't go down that road. I think that's not appropriate, but that is the attitude, and the question had to do with, is it possible somebody could go to a psychiatric facility and come out worse? Of course it is. But that's a possibility regardless of what the condition is. In other words, I'm sure that over the years, some people I've had every intention of helping, not with that kind of problem, but with something else, may not have benefited from my efforts, and may indeed have been worse. Well, here's another one. It says, my friends and other mothers are running constantly trying to get their children into all sorts of after-school activities and extra programs on the weekend and that sort of thing. And some of them are running ragged. The question was, is that normal? Since I don't want to do that, and I don't think I'm wrong. Well, I don't either. I don't think you're wrong. I certainly see some parents, and I marvel at them. How in the world can they put all the things together that they do in 24 hours? People are trying to be full-time employees somewhere, a full-time parent, a full-time homemaker, and a spouse, a wife or a husband, and be part of a family. And there aren't enough hours in the day for all of that. And I see people doing it, and they're balancing out, well, Dad will pick you up, and Mom will pick you up, and this, and they're putting it all together. Hey, time out. I think they ought to just come up and say, let's quit. And set up some rules. Have a family huddle. I've mentioned this sort of thing before, but I really think it's good for people to have a family get together. In fact, I had a man come up to me yesterday. He was a rather interesting and knowledgeable person, and he said, I took my granddaughter to a restaurant, and just the two of us, and I asked her, if you could have anything you wanted, what would you really want? And she said, he was quite surprised. She said, I'd like for the family to have a meal together every day. One meal. And he was quite surprised. But I've heard that sort of thing before. I recommend a family night, and there are certain church groups, for example, the Mormons have put this sort of thing together to have a family night where they don't take any calls, no telephone, nothing else to distract the family. And they enjoy the family. It's very good. Sure, they're going to forfeit some things going, but is that going to be bad? I don't think so. I think what they'll gain out of it will be much more than what they'll be losing. Here's another one. It says, my teacher in social studies talked about reparation for black people and their families to make up for slavery. This high school student who mentioned that to me said, is that a good program? No, I don't think so, because it rewards people who were not penalized and penalizes people who weren't guilty. And then, if you really get into this slavery question, and I've seen that, I saw it even on the news, that some people had got it on their income tax and somehow got some kind of return of their taxes from the IRS because of repatriation. Here's a problem. Slavery isn't new. In fact, it's still going on. We didn't start it in this country. And it's a very, very old practice. It used to be, centuries before Columbus ever came to this country, a very old practice that in war, when you captured the enemy, you made slaves out of them. All kinds of people did that, even the Native Americans. This was quite surprising. When some of the slaves who were brought to this country escaped and went to the Indians, as we called them, as you know, trying to seek help, well, the Indian practice was to make slaves out of them. They made slaves out of other Indians, anybody who was captured. It's even going on now, still is, and was at the time back in the 1600s and 1700s. In our slave embargo, I think it came in about 1808, we didn't import any more slaves. However, it was going on that the black continent of Africa, not all of Africa is black, but the slave traders depended upon blacks in Africa to supply them with the people who were to be made slaves. And it's still going on. There are camps and there are colonies, there are societies that round up other people and sell them off. And selling off people is not at all peculiar to blacks. It's a strange sort of thing. When you really look into that and find out how widespread slavery is. And we hear it all the time about our media. We have truckloads, shiploads of people who are being brought in essentially for slave labor. And no, I don't think this reparation, repaying people for the fact that some of their ancestors were slaves, it doesn't make any sense. I'd recommend that people quit depending upon that dole, figure out how they can make a better living, get on with their education, and do a better job for themselves. I think it'll be very much more important to do that. So here's another one. It says, my friends tell me to get a hobby and my personality will be better. What do you think? Well, sounds like your friends think you're not interested in life, or that you're depressed, or something about you they're complaining about. But at least they're interested in you, and they're telling you to get a life. I recommend hobbies. I've done that for a long time, because people need to do something of their own interest. Just because the person is interested in it. Doesn't matter whether or not it makes money or anybody else is interested in it. That's what a hobby is, should be. And I think everyone needs to feel that he or she is good at something. And we can be as good as we need to be in our own hobby if we're not trying to make a fortune out of it, trying to put it on the market. And we're the best. When we do something for our own pleasure and we're not competing, we're the best. And we get that satisfied there, that we need to feel that we can do something. We need new experiences. I think it's very important. I think sometimes hobbies of doing things for other people, not uncommon over the years. People have come along, talked to me, who've been depressed, that sort of thing, and certain kinds of depressions. I've recommended try to turn it around and invest in other people. And it's very pleasing, very satisfying to see how some of these things have worked out. People have become interested in helping other people, as a volunteer I'm talking about, and doing for others, and it usually helps them get over their depression. It's very important. Sometimes it's a very specific kind of thing for depression. So hobbies, yes. Personality, well, you're not going to change the basic personality regardless of the hobby. But to find something to do, to have something to do, something that just you are interested in and you don't have to compete with anybody else, yes, try it. I have hobbies. I enjoy it. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one. Hello, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. To start with today, I had a question. What's the most common or the common problem that you see in people's adjustment? Now, that's a common question for me. It comes up casually, it comes up socially. People will say, well, what kind of problem do most people have? What kind of adjustment problems do people have? And I think the most common problem that I see is the need for acceptance, feeling of a need to be accepted by others. It comes in many different forms. It comes in many shades, all sorts of dimensions. But if you think about it, need of acceptance. What do you do when you feel accepted by people? You tend to go to them. You tend to go to the place where you feel accepted. Home is where most of us feel accepted. We should be. That should be the place where we can kick back and be ourselves and know that in there at least is where I can be accepted. Whether we grew up in a particular place or not, we'll go to the place where we feel at home. It dictates to us what we do if we don't feel accepted. A person who doesn't feel accepted usually has a chronic problem. Testing, challenging. Usually the person who doesn't feel accepted by others hasn't really accepted himself or herself. The person who doesn't feel personally accepted by himself or herself then sometimes wonders, what do other people see in me that could be good? If they don't accept themselves, they may challenge to think that other people can't possibly see anything in them. That's not an uncommon statement in counseling and therapy for people who make statements like that. I don't see what anybody could see in me, or I don't see how anybody could really like me, or how could a person love me. Pretty common. So we start with accepting ourselves. Now, what's good about you? What do you take pride in? Is there something about you that you'd like to be remembered for? Is there something about you that you would like to think, well, when people think of me, I'd like for them to think about whatever it is. That's one way of getting acceptance from yourself, is to think about, well, what is it? We can usually find some strength that way. We can usually find something in ourselves that we particularly like. Then we will resist anybody who wants to change it. We'll put up barriers. We'll put up blocks. We'll try to hang on to that. That's one way of finding out what you like about yourself, is to see what you don't want to change about yourself. Sometimes the idea that not wanting to change something about yourself is simply because that's comforting to you. The old expression, the devil we know is better than the devil we don't know. Kind of interesting, isn't it? I don't want to change me because at least the way I am, I'm comfortable with it. I'm used to it. But if I really think about it, I can probably find some other ways and some things that are better. Well, here's another one. It says, my sister-in-law is having a bad time in her marriage. Married to my brother-in-law, but they won't go to counseling. Refuse to. The party asked me, what can I do? Well, you can be there as obviously you're doing now. You can be there. You can try your hand at marriage counseling if you want to, trying to help people make an adjustment. So observe their strengths. What does this little couple have that they can build on? What are their strengths? What are their good points? Every family has strengths. Sometimes we have to look pretty hard to find them, but every family has them. And if you identify what they are, then ask your sister-in-law what they are. Help her find them. And every family, every couple, every person has strengths. And that's where the rebuilding or the reconstruction of the relationships really can start and have substance, is to build on strengths, not the weaknesses. Because just to get people to talk about their weaknesses and their problems, oftentimes just locks that problem in. We've gone through an age where the literature was full of everybody ought to talk about the problem. That it's just good to get it out in the open. Let it all hang out was the expression for a time. Well, that's not necessarily good. That doesn't necessarily help people. We don't have to do that type of thing. And sometimes letting it all hang out is not particularly good. I've had people who thought they ought to just tell everything, but they weren't focusing on their own strengths. They were focusing on their weaknesses. And sometimes you're talking about the party who asked this question one time about how could she help her sister-in-law. If you get people to talk about a problem to a third person, it may put a whole different magnitude on the problem. In other words, a husband and wife can talk about a problem, and they may know what a problem is, but it's between them. But if they talk about it with somebody else, then it may magnify the problem. It may become quite different. So it's not necessarily, it doesn't automatically come out, but just getting people to talk about a problem is healthy. So don't try to get your sister-in-law. And you may not want to know that much about your brother. You have to keep that in mind. And be prepared not to ask questions that you don't want the answers for, or that's a hard one to keep in mind, but you may not have the ability to go what the answer would suggest. Because unless you have somehow been trained or schooled in this sort of thing, it's pretty easy to jump in over your head and not know what to do with the information you have. Most of us have far more information than we know what to do with. I was reviewing a publication recently of 20 years of therapy and all sorts of things and the changes that have taken place. And think about it, so often these new ideas and new techniques have come and gone. All of them have some merit. Of course, the experienced person will try to use what's best for the individual at the time. But often, we have more information than we know what to do with. That's not uncommon for those of us who supposedly have been trained in this business. I don't have to know what to do with all the information, though. That's not what's important. Most lay people jump in and they think they're supposed to have answers. No, not necessarily. You don't have answers. It's much better if you help people develop their own answers. That's what we typically recommend. Here's a question. I had it very recently, and I've had it periodically over a period of time. It says, my wife, could be the husband, but it says, this instance, my wife says she loves me, but she's not in love with me. It says, do I know what that means? Do I know what it means? Yes, I think I do, but I've heard it. But I never know what the individual means who says it. I know what it means generally, but when I hear it from someone, I ask very specifically, well, what do you mean by that? Explain it further, or help me understand it. But usually what it means is that the person has a habit, the relationship is going along, there's nothing dramatically wrong with it, but it's not exciting, there's not much feeling in it, the emotion has gone out of the relationship. And that's what usually people mean when they say, I love you, but I'm not in love with you. The being in love means that the emotions kick in, that there's a whole lot of information behind the emotions, and we're not sure what some of those things are. But there's several kinds of love. In English, we just have one word for it. Some of the other languages have different words for different parts of love. For example, we can have love of family. It's not the same as love of a lover. It's not the erotic love. We can have a love of a country or some idea, but other languages have different words for that. But to say that someone is not in love, but that they love the person, means you're okay, but you're not exciting. So, what is there about you that's not exciting now? When you first hear this sort of thing, keep in mind, and I suggest, if the person was in love at one time, then that's positive, that's favorable. It means that the person can be in love again. How and under what circumstances? Under the circumstances of becoming exciting again. When's the last time you did something exciting together? When's the last time that you were exciting about life yourself? Have you become an old grouch? Have you become a couch potato? That's a very common description for a lot of people. I find that oftentimes couples who come along and talk to me about their marriage problems and make statements like that, they quit socializing. They quit going out together as a couple, being with other people. Then when they were going together, particularly before they married, they were often together doing things as a couple that was interesting to both of them. And then over the period of time, maybe children, maybe activity, maybe having 4 or 5 jobs or whatever is going on the couple may have altogether. I find sometimes one person has 3 and the other person has 2 jobs, and then they say, but I'm not in love with a person. Well, I don't know how they have time to be excited about much of anything. But if they put the social life back together, to try to capture and to do the things that were interesting to them before they got married, when they were, quote, in love, you may find that that cures the problem. I would suggest that it probably will. And if it doesn't, well, maybe you need to go see somebody else. Here's another one. It says, I heard a report that in a particular school the teachers made a point of having eye contact in each morning and several times during the day with each student. And that was a program in one part of the school, and another part of the school, that was just a routine. And these children who had the eye contact were reported as doing much better. And that seemed to be what's happening. Well, the question is, how do you look at this? I look at it that that's probably the explanation for a lot of the differences we see in schools. For example, homeschoolers are traditionally finding they do better on standardized tests than people who are in the regular schools. Typical homeschooler, even though they don't have the trained teachers. But what do they have? They have individual attention. Individualized attention, the eye contact, somebody to greet them, somebody to look at them, to look over the shoulder from time to time. Personalized, individualized attention. When we see parents dropping children off at school, or school buses picking up the children, and the parents don't see them again the rest of the day, and the teachers are going through their routine, sometimes children are getting sort of shoved aside. They're more like cogs in a wheel than individuals. So they don't get the one-on-one. I think the one-on-one attention is what is helpful to all of us. It's been documented over and over again out through the years. And look at the homeschoolers, look at the rest of the people where this happens. Small classrooms, more likely to have individual attention. They do better. Until another time, I'm Dr. John Middleton. This is Family Life in the North Country. Have a good one.